Welcome back to another episode of Day One Radio right here on Live Hip Hop Daily. Shout out to everybody that's listening to us in podcast land and checking us out on YouTube as well. I'm Maurice Garland in here with my man BP. What's going on, man?
Ain't nothing, bro. Can't complain. How you doing, man? It's been a second since we've been in here.
Right. But we do actually have a lot to complain about these days. You know what I'm saying? There's plenty to complain about in 2018, especially at this time in the state of Georgia, man.
I guess that was your segue into today's guest. But yeah, man, with this, we speak politically just in our everyday jargon, speak about social things on the show all the time. Rarely do we have somebody who is knowledgeable in the subject come in as a guest, as far as if that's their day-to-day. So today we have a lawyer, political analyst, activist, mom of teenagers, Anoa Changa, Esquire, on the show today. Woman with many, many jobs. Because we want to talk about what's going on with this election for the governor of Georgia, which is kind of swept into the national spotlight as of late, and we'll definitely get into that. But first, I'm going to introduce you to the people, man. Like, how did you get into politics, get into activism? Was this like your parents were activists? Or?
It's my parents.
Okay.
Partly. But hey, y'all. Good to be here. So originally my parents, we're originally from New York and Chicago. Grew up. My stepfather is a former Black Panther and a founding board member of an organization called Critical Resistance that works around prison abolitionist work. And my mom was an activist. She did work around reproductive justice and health and human services work. And they both were affiliated with New African People's Organization and Malcolm X Grassroots Movement and, organizations like that. My father, before I was born in New York, actually learned acupuncture and went to Shakur. So that was like the circle my parents ran in. So that was kind of like what we grew up around, right? But for me as an adult, you carry with you what your parents have taught you or the environment you've been around, but you still find your own path. And I think it took me a while to really get into deeply in activism and stuff. But when we were living in West Virginia after I graduated from law school, and in 2014 we had a chemical spill, and it poisoned 300,000 people in our county area in the capital. And that put Mama Bear in motion because we couldn't drink. We were bottled water, everything for about 5.5 months. So that was what, as an adult, 4 years ago, what kicked me really into super hyper activism overdrive. And still bring with me kind of what it was like growing up Black and poor in urban areas, and then observing poverty in Appalachia and kind of the crossovers. They may vote red or for Trump, but there are so many similarities.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, wow, from the hood to the holler, it's real. There's a lot of commonality if we can figure out how to organize. So that's kind of what got me on this current path right now, the past 4 years.
Yeah. So before we move on, I'm curious. With everything that you had going on in your childhood, was there an actual childhood going on? You know what I'm saying? Because you growing up in the house, it's like, hey man, we gonna do this. Nah, we gonna do this. It kind of reminded me of a scene from that. I don't know if y'all read that book, The Sellout, where the guy was talking about how his dad raised was he put up a Barbie set in front of a black one and a white one. Like, which one do you want? It was like, well, I want the white one. They got the Malibu and the convertible. No, son, you're wrong. You're supposed to pick the black one. You know what I'm saying?
No, it was, for the way my stepfather was maybe a little bit kind of close to that, but not really. But, we still did kid stuff. Growing up in New York, we was at the park and museums and things like that. But I think my parents, because of the way they grew up and something that they put a lot on us as kids to make sure that we went out and socialized with other kids and knew, especially my stepfather, he really wanted us to know how to be around the people, right? Because he was a very grassroots oriented person. So as kids, we need to know how to socialize, interact with other folks, even if they weren't growing up exactly like us. So no, it wasn't quite like that. But my dad still had us watching movies like Ghostbusters and Spaceballs. And
Spaceballs.
You know what I'm saying? We still, I remember being really excited as a kid though, because, growing up in the 80s in particular with conscious rap, when we got to listen to Public Enemy, because that's when we got to curse.
Wow.
So I'd be like, yeah. And then my parents would be like it's in the song. You let us listen to it. So yeah. But I think we had a pretty
I feel like everyone who's listening to this around the world is gonna ask, how the hell did you end up in West Virginia?
In West Virginia.
Because honestly, when you called to figure out the address, I damn near didn't pick up the phone. Like, there's not possibly anyone from West Virginia calling.
So, I actually spent a year in West Virginia in high school living with my godmother. She's a law professor, and she taught at West Virginia University College of Law. And so she was there. She basically integrated the town. I mean, they had some black people, but not really. Gotcha. But like Moesha only came on satellite, I think, because their local cable didn't carry UPN when I was there or something like that. Like, so it was a rarity to be able to see because like nobody had satellite. Right. But I went back there for law school. Like I said, I have 2 kids. I had my kids young. So when I was going to law school, I got accepted there and they gave me funding. So we moved to West Virginia. I mean, they gave me the money to go. So that's how we ended up in West Virginia. And where we lived, we're actually 2 of probably the more diverse places in the state for a state that has no diversity. We pretty much had all of it where we were at. So Charleston, the capital, told is about maybe 15% non-white, which is for a state that's like 2% non-white. It's pretty good.
Right. It's Harlem.
Harlem now.
Right.
So yeah, and my kids really enjoyed it. Like, where my son played Little League, like, was, there was a lot of black kids on our football team. So like, we managed in a space that was very white to find the little bit of color and stuff. I graduated from law school right after the economic crash. So we moved back there because that's where I was able to find a job. So
okay.
So that's our West Virginia story.
So fast forwarding to 2018, why is the Brian Kemp and Stacy Abrams race for Georgia State Governor a huge deal nationally?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, let's just to back up to last year when Stacy announced that she was running, right? When Stacy Abrams announced that she was running, she was announcing that she was running to run for governor. A lot of people knew she was going to do it. But she was also like turning her back on a very traditional way that Democrats, particularly here in Georgia, have run for office, right? Okay. They run more centrist. They try to prove to the Republicans that, hey, I'm almost as Republican as you, except for I'm a little more liberal, but don't be afraid of me type of thing. Pursuing like what folks call the Romney Republicans, right? Like the Republicans who aren't really that bad, but they're still kind of bad. So she decided that like we're going to do this cool new thing called expanding the electorate. That sounds really fancy, right? It's just talking to people that Democrats should be talking to anyway. Like, talking to, not just going and sucking up to folks at the churches and, hey, what I'm saying, let me slip a little money, come on, make sure people come vote for me type of thing. But let me really actually come build and support people who we need to be lifting up, because that's how we can win this thing, right? And when you look at the demographic shift that's happened here in Georgia over the past, I think even just 10 years, you have a huge influx of, there was an article recently about this, folks reverse great migration happening, right? A lot of folks coming from up north moving down south. One, we're all getting priced out of cities up north. Right. Atlanta, a bunch of us are getting priced out of Atlanta, but it's still a lot cheaper than up north, right? And then 2, you also have a large influx of, African immigrants, African and Caribbean immigrants coming in to the South as well. And then you have, the influx of AAPI folks, Latinos, etc. So we have this really good, mashup of folks that we don't need to kind of kiss butt of the borderline, almost not so racist Republicans anymore to try to win. Right. That hasn't worked since Roy Barnes tried to run for re-election in 2002 when he lost his election to then Sonny Perdue, I believe it was. And then he tried to run again against Nathan Deal in 2010, also lost again. Carter's grandson tried to run, same thing, like, hey, I got an A from the NRA, still lost. So that wasn't working. So Abrams was like, you know what? Look, y'all been messing up. Y'all ain't been doing this. Let me come through. And so now we see this really cool strategy, which really, like, any of us who know anything about our people would tell you is like what you need to be doing. If you talk to people about something that matters, if you actually make politics matter to people's lives, they may listen to you, right? Like, I'm not going to just show up and come out for Hillary because you're telling me that Donald Trump is so bad. Guess what? Things have still sucked the last however many years of my life. Right. And we saw that response in Milwaukee, for example, right? In parts of Ohio, we saw black voters say, nothing has changed. I'm still poor. Everything's still a mess. Why should I even show up and vote? Right. And Democrats have not done a good job of responding to that, right? So we see Stacy Abrams on the national stage. We see Andrew Gillum doing the same thing and several other folks up and down the ballot. Like, we got to go talk to non-voters. Novel idea, I know. We got to spend money talking to people who don't vote because we need them to vote. We need their votes. And this is how we can stand strong on our values issues. So why she's a big deal nationally is because she won her primary over the handpicked, chosen, younger white woman who was in the same vein as all the other white people before her who ran for office. So her win, not only did she beat the brakes off her opposition, right? Like, she had a resounding win, but she proved that her strategy works in the primary because you saw increased turnout in the primary. You saw increased participation from people who had never voted before. And you did see an upsurge in, POC, people of color voters. So now here we are. We are 2 weeks away from the general election, and there's a lot of organizing stuff that's happening on the ground. We're already seeing early vote numbers come in, and there's been greater participation and stuff. So she's a big deal because when she wins in 2 weeks, one, it'll teach people to stop passing over black women because white people won't vote for us or support us, or really black candidates in general.
Period.
Right? And then two, that, hey, talking to non-voters about issues that matter is actually a winning strategy. Novel idea, I know. So, I think that's why she's so important nationally, and locally. She's important because Brian Kemp is probably the bottom of the barrel that they could have. Well, besides the dude with the deportation bus. Right.
I was like,
I think they're probably friends. Of course, they're probably homies. For real.
You got a deportation bus. I'm going to kidnap people and put them in the back of my truck.
Yeah, it's the same shit. Essentially. How is it? You're a lawyer, so I'm assuming that this is illegal. How is it that Brian Kemp is in charge of the election that he's running in?
How is it? How is it a lot of things these folks be doing?
Yeah. But specifically, how is that legal?
Well, part of the problem, right, it should be a blatant conflict of interest, right? Part of the problem is there is no mechanism present to remove him, right? So there are some positions when you run for another position, you automatically have to give up your current seat, right?
Like city council, if you're running for mayor,
boards, things like that, right? When Abrams decided she was going to run similar to her primary opponent, also named Stacy, they both stepped down and resigned their positions in the state legislature. When Karen Handel was Secretary of State back in, 2010? She stepped down as well. Brian Kemp, Brian, as bad as he want to be, can't nobody make me do what I don't want to do. So he's not stepping down. Not only is he not stepping down, he's been recorded saying things in recent fundraisers I'm really worried about all these black people voting.
It's bro, it's your job to get people to vote.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. So it should be illegal. It ought to be illegal. And that's one reason why, not just here in Georgia, do we need Stacy Abrams as governor, but we also need to have some of these people who are running, for state house, state senate down ballot, because we need those legislative changes, because we actually need it written in. Because I want to say, and don't quote me on this because I'm not an expert in election law, but I want to say that the one mechanism would be to impeach him. And I don't see a Republican state house or this governor, you know what I'm saying? I don't see them doing that. And that's a long process, and we only have 2 weeks. So
and it's funny you say that because he announced, I believe in March of 2017, that he was running. Mm-hmm. So this whole process could have started then. So I'm one of those people, I don't know if you've ever heard our show before. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I vote for what's right.
Same here.
So my thing is, and excuse my French, but I feel like people in power in the Democratic Party, specifically locally, are somewhat full of shit for making a big deal about this in the ninth inning. And I know, I know that something was said, a few weeks ago, if not 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
But if he announced last year, and he has a history of purging.
No, I agree.
Then why was this not talked about?
So I think it's a couple of things, and I think that's a really good point you pointed out. And I think that what you just said about being a voter that votes for what's right and votes based on issues, not based on party alignment. I haven't haven't considered myself a Democrat since 2010 when I first moved to West Virginia, and I learned about being an unaffiliated voter. Like prior to that time, I had lived in Ohio, and you had to declare a party when you voted. So I had always, that's where I went to college, so that's where I registered to vote. So I had always
similar in New York is so many things you can't vote on if you're voting nonpartisan.
Right, absolutely. So, which is a longer term problem that's going to take several cycles for folks to unwind. And if anyone wants to know more about electoral organizing, we could definitely talk about that some other time too. But I think what you're saying is a really good point. What I honestly believe is I don't disagree about some folks being full of crap, right? But at the same time, I think also people didn't think he was going to win. Right, like people thought that the other Stacy, because funny story, our current lieutenant governor, whose first name is Lowell, his middle name is Stacy, also spelled the same way as Stacy Abrams. We would have had another Stacy versus Stacy battle had he won. Right. But I really don't think people did not think he was going to win, and I don't think people thought they were going to have to fight him. Not that they didn't think they were going to have to fight him, but I also think that people thought that if he became the nominee, he would do the right thing and just step down. Right? But this is the problem with how stupid Democrats
about Brian Kemp says he's going to step down.
But this is the problem with how stupid Democrats are, though, right? Like look at this. Like, they've been trying to act like there's a gentleman's agreement with the other party for how many years now? Like even in Congress, and folks are like, oh, that's a nice person. We shouldn't, boo at them when they're eating. Like, what are you talking about? Like, have you seen what your colleagues are doing? They don't need to have peace no place. Shut it all down. But I think that's a problem with Democrats, and why a lot of people don't respect Democrats is like, what do you stand for? Which is why I like Stacey so much, because she's like, whatever, I don't gotta listen to y'all. I don't have to play by your rules. This is my game. I can do what I want. I can be as big, black, bad as I want to be, and you can't. They can't control her. Right. And so that's what I think is so powerful also about this race. But I appreciate your point about, why didn't they try to stop this or put this in motion then? I mean, we also there's a lot of things that I wish we could have had a preemptive thing about, but even with like the purges, like some of that stuff, just because of standing issues and the way the courts are so booked up post Shelby, the Shelby case from SCOTUS in 2013, which gutted the Voter Rights Act. Mm-hmm. There are certain things you have to wait for it to happen. So Brian Kemp was definitely a strategic boo-boo, I think. But there are some of these things that were happening right now that they had to wait for it to happen before they can challenge it.
Like with the purges, I know, with the AP story that brought, it said, 70% of them were black, and this is wrong, the exact match rule. Like, how much of it do you think falls on people that have been inactive? From what I have read, it was like a lot of that purging was, these folks ain't voted in 10 years anyway. And now they're like, oh, no, hold up, bro, you can't do that to me. And also when you cross-reference that with, the report saying that 70% of them were black, do you think that, now I'm not putting nothing past anybody, but do you think it was actually a thing where it's like they were meticulously going, one black person, two black person, three black person. Now we got 70% black people. Our job is done. We're winning at this strategy. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the thing with the exact match in particular, it ends up affecting like Black, Latino, and AAPI folks. Same thing with the cross-check system as well.
For those who don't know what AAPI is.
Yes, Asian American Pacific Islander. My bad, y'all. Yes. Apologies. But
the big dudes you went to high school with.
The Rock. But because of they would use cross-check because of commonality in names. I mean, think about like how many folks we know with the last name Jenkins or first name Jerome or something like that. So those things, and think about with Asian folks, right? Like how many Kwans and some of those names are so just the way their naming conventions are, right? Same thing with Latinos. So like that's what the cross match with this exact match. It's a difference of like whether or not there's a hyphen in your name. Like for some folks, it's if your zip code, like if you don't have the 4-digit, like who actually even knows that 4-digit number on there? But if it happens to be on your license, but you didn't put it on your registration form, just all types of stuff. But what you were asking about, like with the purges and people being inactive and stuff, so it is some of that. There are some people who are just incorrectly receiving purge notices. And then there are other folks who are not properly actually registered. Like I had one young sister hit me up on Twitter. She was like, Anoa, what's the number for the election protection? Because I registered before the deadline and I'm still not showing up in the system. So with that 53,000 of those, some of those were people who were pending, but what was in the DMV did not match up. That's what the exact match. But the thing is, when you register at the DMV, right, in theory, when you're registering and you're like getting your license or whatever, all of that same exact information should go into the system and you should be fine, right? But like for me, example, like my whole name is on my license, but I never use my whole name anywhere else. So if I go fill out in theory, if I went and fill out my application to vote, I would be two different people theoretically, because I don't use my whole name the way it is on my license.
And they want to make sure it's you, because it's like, I know like 1,000 Anoa Changas. You know what I'm saying?
No.
So gotta
like,
make sure it's really you.
Me, like when they call my name when they call Anoa, when I go get something to drink,
like,
it's like
30 people stand up.
Really, I know it's like the new Ben. I don't know, but it is really interesting. But the other thing about this too is they sued Brian Kemp over the same exact issue of exact match. I think it was like 40 something, maybe it might have been like 44,000, 45,000 people back in 2016. And they settled, the Lawyers Committee and other organizations settled that lawsuit with him in, I think it was February, March 2017. So they had already went through this with a batch of voters, from last cycle, but they sent a letter this summer. So thinking about preemptive action, they sent a letter this summer putting him on notice that we're watching you. We already have this agreement in place. We're watching you. But like even last summer, so in July of 2017, Brian Kemp's office sent illegal purge notices or illegal notices that people were being moved to the inactive roster because they failed to correct their address. However, these were sent to people who moved within the same county. And by law, they're not required to update their address according to the National Voting Rights Act. So what he was doing, trying to move people to inactive, like they had an ACLU threaten to sue. One of my friends was actually the named plaintiff because they weren't actually supposed to do that, and he was misdirecting the boards of education, boards of elections, and so they had to actually settle that case too. So even though there is some legality there, and there is some of it could be technically in the books correct, the way he's misapplying and using the law to maximize who he can move off the rolls. Which I just found out because someone texted me about voting in West Virginia, that I'm apparently probably still on the rolls in West Virginia, which is insane. But I'm not voting there. There's no voter fraud over here.
It's ironic that you bring that up because literally a little over a year ago, I moved 2 blocks away from where I lived before. Same precinct, same zip code, probably still the same little 4 extension. And I got a letter in the mail a few months ago saying that your registration was no longer valid. You need to change your address. So I did it, and literally I kept looking on the thing to make sure it updated and all of that. And literally maybe 3 days ago, it finally updated. And initially when I tried to do it online, it wouldn't allow me to do it. So it's just like, come on, man. Like it's bogus.
And so, but also the other thing, what you were saying about like people who move and stuff like that, especially when you're looking in areas, like especially when you think about like parts of DeKalb County, other areas where there's high renter turnover rates. Like people might still live in the same general area, but when you're living in this apartment complex, then you might go live in that apartment complex.
Right.
Like the last thing you're thinking about is like changing your voter registration. Right? I'm already registered to vote. It doesn't make any sense. Like I renew my license however many years, whatever, I have to go get a new license, but like people don't think about voter registration in the same way. And I think that goes to like some of the political education we need to be doing. And not just that, just even thinking about why does voting matter. I know a lot of folks are like, I voted for Obama, nothing changed, why should I vote? But we're looking at like our state and local elections, particularly our local elections. We're talking about city council, school board, county commissioners. I've been learning a lot about what county commissioners do and how much money moves through these people's hands. Like we need to be watching them, what they're doing with our tax dollars, right? Whether we paying sales tax, income tax, whatever it is, we are paying for these people to exist and make these decisions. We need to be having a say in what's happening. And I think that these local and state elections are, some people might not be happy with me about this, but more important than what's happening at the federal level.
They are for sure. It's like I've always thought the local elections are more important. And then on top of that, for people that say, I don't vote because of this, that, and the other, I'm like, if you see all the energy and time they're spending to get you to not vote, to get you out of there, it's like, why would you think that your vote does not count? If I'm seeing my enemy, my opponent saying, we're going to move the line over here, we're going to move this block over here, we're going to take your name off of this. Like, if that much energy is being spent to silence my vote, it's like, bro, like it must be worth something. You know what I'm saying? So
and I definitely feel like where people's frustration can come from too, right? You know what I'm saying? I grew up in New York. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Like, you know, Mayor Daley was mayor for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, Rahm Emanuel was thankfully not going to run for re-election, but trust and believe that his money and stuff is still going to be very much running through these elections coming up here. So, but the thing is like when we organize, not just to get people out to vote, because when we're voting in general elections, that's like the final straw, right? Like the best time really to be getting involved is in primary elections and even in drafting people and supporting people who are like really about business to run for us, right? Like you look at Chokwe Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi, mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. And like I said, I was telling the guys before we came on that I was actually out canvassing this past weekend in Oakland for Cat Brooks, who's running for mayor of Oakland.
Sir.
Like when you have these people, you know, Nikita Oliver in Seattle as well, when you have people who are running like from the community, from the people, like we can't just say, oh, they're not going to let them. Who cares what, you know what I'm saying? They didn't want us to be free either. Like, let's just be real. Like those people still wanted us to be slaves. Let's just be real, right? Like those people still wanted us like sharecropping and not voting to begin with. Like nothing black people and other folks have ever gotten in this country has come because people gave it to us. We literally had to rip it from their hands. So like, I don't understand abdicating like our voice and our vote in these scenarios. Now I understand where people be coming from and stuff, but I think that there are strategic things that we can do inside and outside the system until we get to some, you know, black utopia moment where we don't have to mess with white people in their government anymore. Right. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen in my lifetime. So this is where I am.
So, and this is somewhat of a selfish question, but we have a lot of listeners on the West Coast too. I'm from Oakland. So what is, you know, Libby Schaaf is the worst thing to happen to Oakland since the 89 earthquake. So, so how is it, because it's 1 million people running similar to the election here. It is. So what is the vibe? Because I'm not really getting any, I'm actually seeing more things about city council with Kinsey running and them trying to get Desley Brooks out of East Oakland. So I haven't heard a ton about the mayor's race. So like, what is it looking like for being on the ground?
I'll have to send you her. If you all are just want to see a really fly like campaign video, you should definitely check out Cat Brooks for Oakland and check out her campaign video. I was like, dang, her campaign manager was like, you watch it yet? Because they were about to release it, and I'm like, leave me alone. I was like, fine. And I look at it, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. But I mean, the mayor's race, like you said, Libby Schaaf is horrible. Terrible. Oakland, and there was a recent a UN report about homelessness and affordable housing and issues and human rights here in the United States. In Oakland and San Francisco were the only two cities named in the whole state in terms of their mistreatment of homelessness and of the homeless, of the unhoused. And so like when you're looking at the skyrocketing rates, I mean, I think someone was saying to me that Oakland is now 60% renters, and
average rent has in the last like 5-6 years has gone up 75%.
It's ridiculous. And like Libby has done like she's horrible. Like I was driving to Kat's office the first day I got there, and I look out my window, I see a homeless man like standing in the street with his guitar. And then you look up and you see the skyscrapers being built, and then I turn this corner, and then like, you know, I was at Kat's office and I saw the signs and stuff. But with the mayor's race, I mean, pretty much everyone that's running against Libby has latched on to that issue, right, of affordable housing, of homelessness, because that is like one of the top issues. Also the other things being jobs, and then like public safety. Like over 50% of the budget in Oakland goes to the police, not any other type of services or anything like that, right? And you have a police department, OPD has been under receivership, I believe it's been for the past, federal receivership for the past 15 years, and the average is like 3 to 5 or something like that. So like, you know, Libby has failed on so many different parameters. It's like, why give her, you know, another go at failing Oakland, you know, people in Oakland even further. Right. So with the mayor's race, like I think there's a lot of controlled opposition in terms of like the media was coming out of it. So what's been really cool is to get hooked into the folks who are organizing grassroots side for Cat, to get a better understanding of what's going on and kind of some of the issues. Like I got a chance when I was there to go to 2 community forums with her team as well, and just listening to like what people are saying, and even, you know, some of the other folks running for city council and stuff, just seeing what people are talking about. And like folks, the rent is not just too damn high, like it's like ridiculous, astronomical. Yeah. And people are struggling. But not just that, like in California, folks, if anybody follows what's his name who wrote Sorry to Bother You,
Boots Riley.
Boots Riley.
Boots Riley. If you follow Boots Riley on social media, you may have seen that he's been boosting something called Prop 10. Some folks think vote yes. Prop 10.
Rent control.
Yeah, for rent control. What I learned while I was there was that in California, how cities can do rent control is controlled by the state, right? And so what they want to be able to do, particularly since they do have this crisis in Oakland and San Francisco in particular, folks want yes on Prop 10 because they want to break the state's control on cities to be able to enact their own rent control provisions. Exactly. Because rent control only applies to buildings that they were built before, like in Oakland,
it's 96 or something.
It's something less, like more than 20 years ago.
Right.
So all these new builds, or if you like have a suite apartment and your rent's only been like $1,200, but now rent in the area is going up, your landlord can put you out, raise your rent up, and you have no recourse.
Yeah.
And so that is also contributing to the homelessness issue as well. And so you have whole families that are being displaced that way too. So that's like the energy that's coming from that race right now is like, folks are like, literally everyone's like, of course they want their person to be number one because they have ranked choice voting out there.
I hate that shit. It's
So
ranked choice, look it up. It's like one of the dumbest things ever.
It's like really wild. So you get to vote for not one, not two, but 3 different choices in a particular race so that you can make sure your favorite choice is number one. Like, I don't know, it's weird.
All right.
But it's supposed to prevent runoffs and stuff, which I don't think is actually going to happen in this race.
It doesn't.
Because there are so many people running and stuff.
Yeah, and I believe there was a runoff in the last mayoral election, and ranked choice was in that too.
Yeah.
We spoke about, people being apprehensive and about voting, and like we said, we get it. We get some of the reasoning. This is my question as somebody who has been involved in campaigns or whatnot. My issue is people often hustle backwards. We vote people in, then we start asking for shit.
Oh yeah.
When we should be getting together as lobbies ahead of time.
Absolutely.
And doing it like that. So how can the average person or people in a community come to these people and say, this is what we want, and hold their feet to the fire so they do it once they get in office?
No, that's a really great analogy and question, right? Like, I mean, definitely. It's all because you always hear that too, right? No, don't criticize them. We just got to get them in. And then we'll ask for, like, if you want me to do something for you, but you gave me the money up front with no guarantees I'm actually going to do the work, like, why would I come back and do that work for you? Like, that's on you, sucker. Like
right.
Like, why would I do that? But I think, like, there are a couple of different strategies that people are using. One is, like, people's assemblies. And so that's, like, the model that was used to draft the Elder Chokwe, who was originally mayor, city council person, then mayor, and now his son is mayor in Jackson. But it's a similar model that they've used with Kat, as well as was used with Nikita Oliver in Seattle, and actually in Spain. There's like a whole movement where they took over like Madrid and another city in Spain, their city assemblies, I forget what they call it, but it's basically like their version of city council, mayoral, like doing this. And what it is people come together, basically like developing like community agreements and stuff. And these are the issues that we want to focus on. This is the work we want done. Right. And if you're going to run as our candidate and we're going to run you, right, like this is what you need to agree to. And they actually have agreements with the candidates, and they have a built-in like code of ethics, right? So that's like a more like deeper extreme level. But I also think that you can have people like form political clubs and look at like what does it mean like when we have this district right here, like, let's say we have the city council district, like the Pittsburgh community here, right, is an example, or the stuff that's been happening with Turner Field and displacement of folks, like when people are coming together, like these are the issues, this is what's happening in city council, can we pick this one issue just to at least get our start around and start building our momentum or building up our clout of respect in the community, so people are like, oh, they really are actually doing something and moving forward. And that also gives you leverage and action and people in terms of whoever that decision maker is. Because even if that person is trash, at least they know, though, that you coming for them. But you need to also have somebody ready to roll to replace them, right? And be clear on what just say like, oh, we got to get rid of that person, they're so bad, we just need anybody. No, we just don't need anybody. Because you need somebody who's just as bad as or worse.
Everything that you're sharing with us today sounds very sexy. Politics is so sexy to talk about. But like how do we get people to get past that? Because a lot of folks, when you start hitting them with policy, this, folks are like, oh man, I ain't no expert, bro. I just want to show up and click the button, bro. I don't know. Like, is there a place where we can get people more interested at the ground level where it's like, because it seems like it's hard to convince people to care because it seems overwhelming for some folk.
I mean, I think people like start where they are, right? Like start where you're at. Like, what are you involved in? Like, I mean, for a lot of us, we're tired, we're working, we're raising kids, or taking care of sick relatives. Like, you don't, like, I get it. A lot of people literally don't have the time. But is there something you could do like once a month, this like one meeting to just get more information? Like, to just, I mean, like, yes, we need a critical mass of people to enter the system to like totally overflow it so that it like just breaks. Like, you know, when in the first Matrix, when Neo goes into Smith and like makes him burst from the inside out. I mean, like, that's how I see it. But at the same time, I think like we find how we can engage and how we can build. So like, real simple thing that can make a huge difference is even like here in APS, we now have these like school go team things or whatever, right? So like you have your little PTA, whatever, but the go team is the actual decision making body for the schools. Right. Now, I'm actually bad, and I apologize because I actually haven't been able to make it to my kids' go team because I do all this other national work and I'm tired. But see, I'm speaking from experience that there are ways that we can start getting involved in these like little meetings and stuff like that. And I know it can seem like connect with an organization that is also like doing this type of work. So like Song here in Georgia, in Atlanta, Southerners on New Ground, they're so organized. If you've ever been to a city council meeting and seen them in action, like they got like cards when they're like, it's because you gotta be quiet. So instead of booing, they have like hand signals they do. Like it's wild. But these are folks that are willing to like, there are you can look around and see who the organizers are around you who are really about stuff. You can see folks who are just for flash for social media and viral videos, right? So like you find folks who are kind of already doing this stuff and seeing like, can I come by for 2 hours this month and maybe like help make some phone calls? Or if that's still too big of a step, can I at least come to this informational meeting so that their body's in the seats so that I can learn more about this thing? Because a lot of folks do teach-ins and stuff. There's stuff, you know, people have different things on their websites and training tools. There's another organization here in Atlanta, Project South, which is across the South, that has like this thing called Southern Movement Assemblies where they do trainings and things like that too. So, I mean, these things, I know like words like trainings and seminars may seem like really big and like only for the professionals, but they're not. Like that's one thing that I think that white folks and like black elites have done really well is to convince us that politics and these tools and resources are out of our reach and not accessible for us as average people, right? Like, yeah, I've developed the acumen that I have, but it's not because like, oh, like we've always just discussed politics and our family was just so, like, nah, not at all. Like, it's just something that I knew was important and I had to like, you know, get up to speed real quick because unlike Buffy and Becky and everybody else I went to law school with, like it just wasn't like that for us growing up. So we have to figure out where we fit in and make it work for us, not try to fit into what they're doing, how they do it.
Like the saying says, like, go pick up a shovel. You know what I'm saying? Like, pick up a shovel first. Like, you don't always have to start your own thing or, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's probably somebody already doing the work that you're thinking about doing. Pick up a shovel, look them up, and join them.
I mean, and sometimes it happens in crisis. We've seen a lot of folks come together around some of the issues that we've seen with Black Lives Matter working on. But like one thing also here local in Georgia, down in Stockbridge, just south of Atlanta, there is something on the ballot to literally rip apart the city of Stockbridge. It's like de-annexation. They're trying, the rich area of Stockbridge is trying to build its own brand new city, Eagles Landing. Well, there's a sister, shout out to Yolanda, who started a citizens group. She's never done anything like this before. When I met her, she's like, oh my God, I'm glad I get to meet professionals. I was like, professionals? I was like, girl, I was doing the same thing you were doing like a year and a half ago. Like, what are you talking about? Like, but she started a citizens group to fight this ballot initiative because the residents of Stockbridge outside of that area, they can't vote on it. Only the people in that special little area can vote on it. Wow. But she has now organized this whole big thing with all these volunteers because she just started learning and figuring out, what do I need to do to stop this? Who are the people I need to be asking questions of? And you'll be surprised at how receptive people can actually be. Now, if you're trying to replace them, they're not going to be receptive to you at all. Right. But if you try to do something, you know, I mean, we got to be strategic, and we just got to figure it out at multiple levels, like how we can do it and how we can push forward to move forward our agenda and what that is. Media
has been a big thing with this election, with, you know, The Economist Daily doing, you know, major stories on the election. I believe Stacy was on the cover of Time, wasn't it, a few months ago. But locally, the coverage has been a little skewed. So, particularly, I think there was an article on Medium about the AJC's, negative coverage of Abrams versus their somewhat turning a blind eye to Kemp's bullshit. So my question is this, for people who aren't heavily into politics and know all these niche websites or whatever, and they understand that Fox News is bad, CNN is good, and all of that, whatever, because that's how most average person thinks. What are good media outlets or resources for people to be able to do their own research and get something that's not like super liberal, not super conservative, just discussing the facts of these different elections?
I think what's so hard with the way media has become so commercialized, it's really hard to find anything that's just straight objective, and not, unless it's like some in-depth, research study. I think it's really hard because everything is a clickbait something. Because even if you look at the coverage from the AJC of this race over the past year, right? Like I wrote a piece on my blog back in March about when they debt shamed her. Like when they were debt shaming Stacy Abrams. Like literally there was a piece like raising questions about her suitability to lead because she had student loan debt. Like really? Who the hell doesn't have student loan debt these days? Especially she went to Yale for law school and come from a poor black family from Mississippi. Like who paying for that? Right. So I think though, in thinking about, sometimes like I like will cross-reference and cross-read different things. Be careful with even though I am a blogger, I will say be careful with people's blogs. And make sure you're looking at like what links, what sources they're citing to. Make sure like stuff is cited and sourced, right? It's one thing if someone's know the difference between an opinion piece and an actual factual journalistic piece. Because a lot of what we have right now is also opinion writing too.
Opinion news.
News, not actual factual based news. But I think when you look at things like, you have like The Guardian, which is a really good source, I think. But the problem is with local and state elections, it does get hard. So sometimes you do have to rely on local, independent journalists or bloggers, or just really like kind of just fact checking and stuff. And it's a challenge because we should be able to rely upon media to accurately inform. But I think as there has been a chase more for, subscriptions and viewerships and things of that nature, and a less away, because I just feel like when we were younger, like for our generation, news actually was news.
Yeah.
Now it's like a reality show. I mean, just think about the 2016 election. They gave Donald Trump like over $2 billion of free, advertisement because he was, as the CBS had said, he was good for ratings. Yep. He wasn't good for America, but he was good for ratings. Yep. And so there isn't a concern, and we saw this blatantly in 2016, there is not a concern for truth and justice in the American way or whatever, but there is most definitely a concern for ratings and money and ratings and subscriptions and all that other stuff. So I think that's what we're seeing with the AJC. And as someone who has been misidentified, mischaracterized by the AJC on 3 or 4 occasions, they are not on, they might have a good piece here or there, let an op-ed in. They had a pretty good op-ed from Reverend Warnock about a week ago. But the all-white male political opinion staff over there, their anti-blackness is so strong. So you got to really kind of really screen what people are saying.
In Atlanta.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Well, they're in Dunwoody now, actually.
That's true.
That also explains a lot.
That's very true. Yeah. Before we go, final question. A lot has been made about early voting. Why is early voting important?
I think early voting is important because you shouldn't put off for tomorrow what you can do today. Like I went and voted on the first day and was in and out. I mean, a lot of folks, but thankfully I'm here in Fulton County and we got like 1 billion early voting locations. Yes. Like Cobb County, I think only opened their second one recently. Other locations, I think down in Warner Robins, they just started early voting this week.
I was looking at the Atlanta Alert. I was like, I have so many options, bro.
Yeah.
Looking at damn Direct TV.
There's 20. It's ridiculous. And then right next door in other counties, you might have 2 or 5 for a similarly very populated county. But I think we're early voting, and you can Saturday vote. You can Saturday vote the next 2 Saturdays if you're here in Georgia. You can Sunday vote this Sunday as well. And actually, Black Voters Matter has, I can't remember what the 5 counties are, but Black Voters Matters is actually caravanning folks to go do their version of Souls to the Polls on Sunday. So I think it's important to early vote, to make sure that you get in there, because you don't want any voting day, because if there's an issue when you go to early vote, you know you still have another chance to go. But if you go on voting on election day and there's broken machines, long lines, you gotta get to work, it rains, whatever, that's it. Like, so I think if you can vote early, definitely do so. I think it's actually still possible for folks to vote by mail, which I just learned that you don't need an excuse to do so anymore. You can just vote by mail because you want to, because you feel like it. I don't necessarily trust Brian Kemp because they've been rejecting people's absentee ballots. And then you don't trust them because of the machines either. So
and it's like they trying to give this man a promotion. He hasn't even proved that he can do the first job right, and they essentially dropped to vote this man to a promotion.
He has said he doesn't want to do his job right when he's concerned about those people are trying to vote. Like, and why are you out here lying about criminal illegals voting? Like, dude, that's not even possible unless you're failing at your job. Like
what criminal wants to vote any damn way? Like that's real, man. It's like they always talk about voter fraud. I'm like, I'm always imagining somebody dressing up like a character from Pink Panther or something with like a trench coat. And, I'm going to vote illegally. I'm going to try to do this shit 3 times. It's like nobody's thinking about doing that.
But funny story about criminals in voting, or people who incarcerated folks in voting. In Boston, there's a DA race right now with Rachel Rollins, who's running for Suffolk County DA, sister running, and she's running on a real progressive platform, trying to end cash bail and not charge on low-level drug possession, all types of really great stuff that has white folks up in Boston super scared because, oh my God, she wants to free all the criminals. But funny, you were talking about criminals and voting. They actually did forums with people in jail, the prosecutors, ahead of their primary. So they actually had an organization that advocates for incarcerated folks, and they did, I think it was 1 or 2 forums to kind of get input from the incarcerated population. So even though they couldn't vote, that was still a population that was still considered in the process, their forum process, which I thought was actually kind of interesting. Folks may disagree about whether or not that should factor or matter, but the last caveat I'll give about incarcerated folks, or formerly incarcerated folks, is down in Florida. What's at stake in addition to electing Andrew Gillum for governor is the Amendment 4 to the Constitution that actually restore the right to vote for those who were formerly convicted of felonies. Because right now in Florida, if you were ever convicted of a felony, you can't vote at all.
And you can't do nothing to get it back. I mean, I've seen some of their public access TV where it's like a guy was incarcerated. He got out 20 years ago. He done started 3, 4, 5 nonprofits helping poor people, young people.
Yeah, Desmond Meade is amazing.
You still can't vote. You don't go to church. We don't know what church you go to, so you can't vote.
Desmond Meade, the person responsible for that even being on the ballot, can't vote for his own amendment. That's because insane. He can't vote. But I think it's 20, I forget, it's a large percentage of black voters and black men in particular who are disenfranchised and not allowed access to the ballot in a state like Florida. And there's a couple of states like that. Louisiana also has a similar ballot measure too. So that was my little tidbit about that.
For sure. We appreciate you coming through, most definitely. Please tell people where they can follow your work, because we didn't even talk about the organizations that you're part of and Think Progress. Okay. Please tell people where they can follow. Right.
Well, y'all can hit me up on Twitter, because that's where I frequent. The Way with Anoa, ANOA. And my podcast is on, I'm on iTunes, The Way with Anoa. I'm on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher, and Google Play, I think. I used to be on iHeartRadio, but I don't think I'm on iHeartRadio anymore. But yeah, a bunch of places. I felt special because Spotify was like, "Yay, you're in!" And then 4 days later, they were like, "Everybody can be on Spotify now." And I was like,
"Right, we felt the same way." I
was special for 4 whole days. I was like, "I'm on Spotify." They were like, "Really?" And then my other friend got an email. They're like, "Do you know anyone can be on Spotify now?" I was like,
which is good. That's good.
But it is good. But I was in before the rest of you. So.
Exactly.
So yeah. And Instagram is The Way with Anoa, but on Facebook it's Anoa Changa ESQ. So.
All right, for sure. Yeah. Well, we appreciate y'all listening, appreciate y'all watching. Please get out there and vote, especially in these cities where it's going to be real crucial. In these states, it's real crucial. We need progressive people in these offices. Mm-hmm. Do not vote for Brian Kemp, please. Vote in Andrew Gillum, and I promise you, all my folks in Oakland, if y'all let Libby Schaaf get in again, Oakland will be 1% black.
Don't even rank Libby. Don't rank her at all.
Don't even write her name. Don't even speak her name when you walk in the building.
Not at all. She's actually on the ropes too in the polls. So
good.
Don't even.
Can't stand Libby Schaaf. All right. And on that note, we're out of here. See y'all next week with another dope show.